Hey everybody, it's Paul Ramsey, day 2 of our free webinar series on the profession of hypnotism. A little bit better today, right? A little better today. Got my water, gonna nurse it throughout the whole thing. Then I get myself laughing, I start coughing. Okay, so today we're talking about the science of stage hypnotism, really trying to focus on what is actually happening hypnotically when people are on stage. So as we get this kicked off, keep in mind, if you have a question, you can ask a question in the comments area at the bottom of the host page that this is being hosted on. You can tweet me a question at Twitter. That's at Ramsey Media LLC, RAMSAY MEDIA LLC. Or if you have a Google Plus account, you can get in touch with me through Google Plus, and you can ask me to invite you in to this hangout. It's going to be a little hard now that we've already started, but I can try to get some of you in last minute. You just need to get in touch with me. Best thing right now is probably to add a comment in the comments area at the bottom of the page, or to tweet me your questions, okay? So what we're going to talk about is a lot of people have a hard time getting their head around what they're witnessing when they go to a stage show, what they're actually witnessing on stage. So I want to address that with you today, all right? The simplest way, there's a lot going on, first of all. There's a lot going on, and if you want to get into stage hypnotism, if you want to become a stage hypnotist, you really have to learn several skill sets in order to manage what happens on stage. It is primarily, of course, you have to manage hypnotism itself. You have to learn how to hypnotize people. But there's actually a lot of multitasking that goes on. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow when we talk about the art of stage hypnotism. Today we're going to focus on just the hypnotic aspect of it, okay? So when people come in, first of all, it's important to understand that when people are in a stage show, it's because they choose to be in a stage show. So the first thing is, this is not voodoo. This is not black magic. Hypnotists don't wield some kind of otherworldly power that they, over people. What you're really doing is you're engaging in a cooperative experiment. From the very moment, there's some social engineering that goes on, right? From the very moment that a person decides to go to a stage hypnosis show, they're taking themselves one step closer to being hypnotized. Whether they really know what the stage hypnosis show is or not, they're choosing to go to it. That brings them one step closer to what we call compliance. Now, when they get there, they can choose to not be compliant. They can still say, nope, I'm not doing this. I'm just going to watch. But the next factor is really that of expectation. If you go to a stage hypnotism show with some level of expectation that you will learn more about the experience, if you have a curiosity about what the experience is like, you take another step toward possibly being hypnotized. Because what you're really doing is you're creating a sort of expectation or imperative at the deeper level of your mind that you want to maybe learn about that experience, and therefore opening yourself up more to it. But for most people, there needs to be a moment in which you choose, in which you say, I really want this, and you choose to cooperate with the hypnotist in this cooperative experience. Now, for most stage hypnotists, there is literally a moment in which they invite you to come up on stage. And that's sort of your crystallizing moment where you either say, yeah, I want to give this a go, or nope, I'm staying in the audience. Now, that is not to say that people who choose to stay in the audience cannot be hypnotized. Sometimes their curiosity still wins out and gets them into a hypnosis situation because they're so curious about what it would be like to get hypnotized. So that still does happen to people, but mostly when people make the choice to separate themselves from the audience and go up on stage, they're taking another step toward compliance. As this compliance builds, we get more and more toward a sort of moment of truth or a moment of shift or a moment of state change. And the hypnotist's job is to help that occur. It is not, again, it's not a magical process. It's not voodoo. There's a process that's happening. So from the moment you walk in the door, you've become a little more compliant. And then you take your seat. The hypnotist comes out on stage, and the hypnotist begins doing what we commonly call a pre-talk. A good pre-talk is designed to help generate rapport, a feeling of goodwill and trust between the operator and the subject. That pre-talk has components. It should do certain things. We train on this when we train stage hypnotists, all right? It's not random. Everything that a hypnotist says while they're doing a pre-talk has a purpose. It should either be showing their competency, their level of knowledge and expertise so that you trust them more. It should be endearing them to you using humor, self-deprecating humor or other forms of humor to make you seem more likable and so that to make them seem more likable so that you'll like them a little bit more. And there should be some kind of a reward, a reason that you feel that if you explore hypnosis on that particular day, you'll get something, right? The carrot, you know? We don't want to employ the stick in hypnosis, to use the old metaphor of the carrot versus the stick. The stick is no good in hypnotism in the stage environment. We want to dangle a carrot. We want to give a reward. And so if you put together a pre-talk that has all of these components well aligned, then rapport is generated. The person trusts you. They feel like you're going to take good care of them. And you've built some language constructions into your pre-talk that let them know they're going to get something good from this experience. There's going to be a reward to going forward with this experience of being hypnotized. If you've done that pre-talk well and you've primed them, another old phrase is priming the pump, right? In order to get a pump to pump water, you have to prime it with a little bit of water in the pump cylinder to make that pump work better. So we use that metaphor with the brain as well. Prime the pump, load it with some information, with some emotional activation that prepares the brain to want to work in a hypnotic setting. So your pre-talk does that. When you've delivered a good pre-talk, you then move on to a selection process. And this can vary. This is a stylistic concern to some extent, but it's also a somewhat scientific and functional process. All right, what you're going to do, I'm already getting cracky. I'm going to pop one of these cough drops in. You want to have a sample of people that you collect from the audience, and then you want to assess from that sample who you think is going to give you the best chance of hypnotizing them. Traditionally, what stage hypnotists do is they'll ask people to come up on stage. They'll take more people on stage than they need, and then they'll do some sort of assessment, what we often call a suggestibility test. Suggestibility tests really, in most of the ones I've ever learned and what I teach to my students, they are really mini hypnotic inductions. In order to pass a suggestibility test, you must show some level of hypnotizability, the ability to set aside critical thinking, to think metaphorically, to think symbolically, to engage the imagination, to not think critically. So suggestibility tests, since they're done in groups, are often ritualistic. The hypnotist takes over as somewhat of an authority figure and says, please follow these steps. Do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And as people get in line, they're lining up and taking on a ritualistic atmosphere. They follow along. And ritual, whether we go back to religious ceremonies, indoctrination procedures, all that kind of stuff, ritualistic procedures, there's something about the way they work in the brain. They get people, they eat up all the working memory in the brain, leaving very little working memory space to critically analyze what is actually happening. So ritualistic procedures, that's what inductions really are. That's what many inductions really are. That's what most, I would say, hypnotizability tests, suggestibility tests are. And so in that ritualistic procedure, the working memory of the brain is consumed, leaving very little or no working memory for critical thinking. And when we bypass that critical thinking, we're able to transition people into a hypnotic state. So typically, a traditional hypnotist might do 2 suggestibility tests, which would really function as 2 mini hypnotic inductions. A lot of hypnotists, it's funny how many times I've talked with hypnotists who don't really connect that themselves. We tend to compartmentalize our knowledge and our information sets. And a lot of hypnotists think, I have suggestibility tests and I have inductions. And it's like, well, only because you say they are. Like, if a suggestibility test is to work, it must be hypnotic in order to produce the desired result. It must be its own simple form of induction. And so if people pass, then they're hypnotizable. If they don't pass, they're excluded. And it's not that they're never hypnotizable, it's that they're not hypnotizable on this particular instance. And so they're excluded and sent back to the audience. When you train with me, I'll tell you, I actually don't follow that model. I do hypnosis in a very different way than most hypnotists do. And I'll explain why when you're in my training program. And I'll tell you this whole other way of thinking about hypnosis that I think is really powerful. But I'll cover the generals traditionally because that's what most people can relate to. They've gone to a hypnosis show. They've seen hypnotists do this. So that's what I'm explaining now. You get through your suggestibility tests. You exclude the people who didn't do so well. You focus more now on the people who are doing well. You've decreased the group size. And really, by doing suggestibility tests, you have led some people already into a light hypnotic state. And your high hypnotizables may even go into a full hypnotic state just during their suggestibility tests. This is quite common. When you get trained on how to do this work, you learn how to assess these things even in the early stages, and you're making mental notes about who you're going to keep and who you're going to let go. But just to keep your numbers up, some of the ones that haven't outright failed, they've shown some potential, you're keeping them as well. You're going to put them through the main procedural element, which is the induction itself. Now, inductions have different styles and they have different components, but they're generally all made of, they sort of serve the same thematic structures, okay? Inductions either surprise and confuse people, thereby triggering an element of brain activity which makes them much more likely to go into hypnosis. And that would take a long time for me to explain here, but I could, in my training program, we talk about that. So you can surprise or shock people, and the confusion of that experience triggers an old, what some people call fight or flight, but it's an old, simple, primal experience in the brain, which transfers people into a hypnotic state, hyper-focused state. An old safety threat assessment system is what it really is. That's one way that you can induce people. Another way that you can induce people is really by boring them into hypnosis. This is traditionally known as the progressive relaxation, where you speak in a long, steady, monotone voice, and you really just try to make it as soothing yet boring as possible. Because when people are exposed to this long, drawn-out monotone, there's a tendency for them to just shift into a hypnotic state. The brain wants to relax. It wants to conserve energy. And when it gets into a boredom state after being too focused on something for too long, it will shift quite naturally in a lot of cases. This is why we get into daydreaming when we're in class, when we're students, or why we get into daydreaming when we're in a meeting at work. We've been droning on about the same thing for too long. We go into these daydreams. It's the same mechanism. So you can use it on stage. You can bore people into hypnosis. So shock and surprise, boredom, or your third major theme would be to lead people along a more focused experience by giving them some sort of task. When you let people exist in their normal day-to-day life, they're usually multitasking a lot. They're having a conversation with you, but they're also thinking about what they need to do next, or what they need to do when they get home. They need to pick up their dry cleaning or go buy milk or remember to tell someone or return a phone call. There's a lot of multitasking that goes on. In a stage show, if you can clear that clutter, if you can get them to focus more and more on a singular experience, they will go into a more focused state, which is what hypnosis really is. Hypnosis is a state of narrowed attention and increased suggestibility, right? It's absorption. We don't talk about this a lot, I don't think, in our daily lives, but the more absorbed we are in an experience, the more mesmerized we are, right? That's what we often, this music is hypnotic. There's something about it that just gets you really absorbed in the experience of listening to it. Or this movie is mesmerizing, has great visual scenes, special effects. We get more and more absorbed. Anytime that we get absorbed in an experience, we're really slipping into trance. And so stage hypnotists develop a bunch of different ways of helping people have that experience. We might use music with a low beats per minute ratio. We might use visuals, spinning color wheels, kaleidoscopes, whirligigs, things like that. Or we might just use our voice in a very methodical way to change tone and pitch to get people to start to follow along. It's called entrainment. And we use entrainment, which the old really cool example of entrainment was, I should have thought of this in advance. There was this guy who was a clockmaker, and he had all these grandfather clocks around his shop, right? And as he would fix them and get them going again, he would just let them run. And what he found is that if he would leave, all these clocks were going, right? And the pendulums are swinging at different rates and stuff. And over time, the pendulums would entrain. And eventually all the clocks in the room, they would have the same pendulum swing. It's because the vibration that those pendulums and the gears in the clock were emitting would be harmonically clashing. And eventually they would get more and more into sync. And the pendulums would synchronize. Entrainment. Well, we are just vibrational beings ourselves. We're vibrational expressions of energy. And so we can have that effect on each other. We can be dissonant or we can be consonant, right? And so hypnotists, one of the things that hypnotists study is how to create entrainment opportunities, how to use your voice, your body language, your language choice to entrain others into your energy set. And so what happens is when you hypnotize people on stage, it's very common for the hypnotist as the operator to also go into a hypnotic state since we are in training together. The big falsehood is that you sort of sit on a perch above your subjects like a puppet master and you wield this power. It's not. It's a cooperative experience. You do it with them. You just happen to be the one who's facilitating. So you do always sort of have this leadership role. But that leadership role, as you get entrained, becomes diminished quite a bit. And you're really just helping. You're not puppeting people. You're helping them have an exceptional experience. That's the way I like to look at it. And that's the way I try to teach my students. And I really think of it as part of, on the last day of this webinar, we're going to talk about the heart of stage hypnotism. And I think stage hypnotism can be, if you approach it the right way, a gift to other human beings. We'll talk more about that on day 4. But today, we're sticking to the science, and I'm going to be disciplined. God, my voice is awful. I apologize. So, or maybe my voice is good. Maybe you find that my voice becomes more and more relaxing, soothing, and entraining to you. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so when you get through your induction procedure, you've narrowed attention, you've created absorption, then what you want to do is further that process even more. So from a scientific standpoint, what we're doing is we're getting the brain to close down and narrow attention, losing the multitasking, engaging the reward centers, dopamine release in the brain to get more and more rewarded by following a path which gives them what they seek. So, not visually, auditorily, what you've done is you've set up in your pre-talk, you've told people this is going to be a relaxing experience, a positive experience, a de-stressing experience, a fun experience. You've set all that up. And now in your actual induction, you're using even more specific language patterns. You're talking to people about letting the stress melt away, about their muscles getting softer, more flexible and pliable, about their face getting more loose and empty. And you're doing all these things that connote a feeling of release and relaxation. Typically, most stage hypnotists do. You can do different methods, for entertainment value, but generally, let's stick to this for now. People agree with this. It feels good to them, and they become congruent. And as they do this, they actually get a dopamine release in the brain, a feeling of reward. Their vagus nerve that runs from the brain down to the heart is getting calmer and transmitting signals to slow down the breathing, slow down the heart rate. This is polyvagal theory. If you want to learn more about that, you can check out a video I did at hypnoticthoughts.com with Dr. Manny St. Victor, where we explain polyvagal theory. But there's a direct connection, this nerve that runs right down along the carotid from the brain down to the heart. And it is a huge factor in controlling stress response. So in hypnosis, we're getting these changes, parasympathetic responses from the brain through the rest of the body, increased lacrimation, the tear ducts release more water, changes in circulation. The blood comes up into the capillary level of the skin, producing rosy cheeks, blotches on the chest and the arms, intensely blotchy red spots. These are things you can observe. These are observable phenomena. And so all of this stuff is occurring. And as a hypnotist, you train and you learn how to identify these things so that you know who's doing better, who's doing good, who's doing better, who's doing the best, who's struggling a little bit, maybe is only getting into light hypnosis and no deeper than that, and maybe you need to let them go. So you know the science of what occurs parasympathetically, the mind, the body, all this stuff. You've trained on it. You're learning to observe it and watch it on stage, and you use it to get your working group down to a core group of people who are the best hypnotic subjects. You deepen their hypnosis through a variety of techniques, either simple verbal techniques of leading through exercises in the brain that deepen them, or you use suggestion. You set up an actual suggestion. You give them a task like catalepsy. You get the arm out, arms clasped, arm like this. There's different ways to do it. You actually get the arms to get stuck in a position. By providing this experience to the subject, they have a moment of realization and they buy into their hypnosis even more. All right? So this is where you start working your group. You put them through these experiences. You deliver suggestions to them. You give them an experience. They get their eyes stuck. They get their hands stuck. They get their arms stuck. You have them forget their name. There's all kinds of different things that I teach my students to do. And what you do is you start out on a simple level with what's most likely to work for as many of them as possible. And you work that process sort of like a pyramid up to higher and higher levels of success, which in the hypnotic sense would be deeper and deeper levels of depth, right? And so you keep giving them these tasks. And what you want to do, we talk tomorrow about the art of hypnosis, of stage hypnotism. You want to do that in a way that's as entertaining as possible. That's what we'll talk about tomorrow. But today, for the science of hypnosis, the focus is you need to do it in a way that's as functional as possible, that increases absorption more and more, that deepens their state more and more. Because the deeper you take them into hypnosis, the more complex hypnotic phenomena you can achieve. Think about that. The deeper into hypnosis you take them, the more complex hypnotic phenomena you can achieve. All right? For example, ultimately, what you're really going to do when you get to the utilization point and you're really just delivering suggestions over and over again, we call that utilization, where you give someone a suggestion that they will utilize in state. When you get to utilization, what you're really doing over and over again is just creating hallucinations. You give them a hallucination to smell. You give them a hallucination to hear. You give them a hallucination to feel. You give them hallucination to see. They have different levels of complexity. And the more complex they are, the deeper the person needs to be in trance for it to succeed. You get them to, early on, it's something simpler would be to forget their own name. Well, then maybe later you get them to visually hallucinate that their hand is talking to them. When you give this suggestion, you learn over time to figure out, get a sense of, do they see it talking to them? Do they hear it talking to them? Or both? And to visually hallucinate is one of the more complex hallucinations that you can have. So then you sort of make your mental note about that person. They're doing really well. And then you give them an even more complex visual hallucination later. They're going to see a celebrity, their favorite celebrity, who isn't really there in the room, but they're going to see him. And when they fulfill that, now they're really getting deep. And you keep doing that stuff. You just keep giving hallucinations over and over again. And if you build them well and you make them interesting and fun, the way the person fulfills that suggestion, the way they experience that hallucination will in and of itself be entertaining for the audience. The way they react to it, the way they encounter it will be entertaining. And so that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to create these interesting and amusing ways of giving people hypnotic hallucinations. That's your job, right? When you get to the deepest possible level on stage hypnosis, you can even give people a negative hallucination. You can get them to not see something that is there. You can make the entire audience disappear, right? You can make yourself disappear. They'll still hear you. They'll still know you're in the room, but they can't see you. It's a fascinating thing to experience with other people on stage and watch the way that it just confounds them, the confusion, the awe, sometimes the fear. You do your best to shape that for them really quickly so that they're not, don't get upset. I like them to have fun on stage. But all of these things, hallucinations. Now, that's the bulk of your show. You do all these hallucinations. You play with it, you have fun with it, and then you're going to finish that process with what's called emergence. And emergence is just a release from the focused state, right? So you lead them out of that state, you count them from 1 up to 5, you talk them up to it, and they release themselves. They emerge from hypnosis. And you do your best, because you want to treat hypnosis as a gift, I think. You do your best to even make that a wonderful experience, to make it soothing, pleasing, to give them more positive energy, beautiful positive energy. You maybe even leave them with a post-hypnotic suggestion. This is another aspect of hypnotism. You can implant an idea in the subject which stays, sort of like putting a file in a filing cabinet. You can implant an idea that stays with them even after they've left the hypnotic state, and that can be activated at a later time. So there are so many wonderful ways that you can do that. You can give them a beautiful post-hypnotic that evening after being in your show, they will fall asleep quickly, easily, and enjoy the most pleasant night's sleep that they've had in a long, long time. And I do that a lot. And I get emails from people thanking me. Paul, I was in your show the other night. I got the best night's sleep I've had in at least a year. Thank you so much. If you're at a particular event where your volunteers are coming from a particular group, a student group, a business group, you can custom fashion a post-hypnotic that's appropriate to that group as a gift that you share with them. And again, so many examples, too many for me to list, but you can do that. And so as you emerge people from hypnosis, you can leave them with this final gift. And that really creates a strong positive association with the whole experience of being hypnotized. And you can do it in a way that's entertaining too. You can create fun post-hypnotics that, okay, they've come out of hypnosis, but before they leave that room, that post-hypnotic is going to be activated somehow and provide one more last funny experience for everybody to share in together. That can be a fun thing to do. So, but, there's a certain way to clear all the earlier hypnotic suggestions. You want to make sure people can, some people who are really, really good at hypnosis, they can hold them. They can cling to them and take them with them outside of the room. Usually they contextually know that when the show is done, everything's done, and they release everything and let it go. Most people do, but not everyone. So you learn when you get trained again, you get your proper training, you learn to build in a process for people to release those suggestions, clear them from their mind, and let them go, so that they leave not carrying any of that with them, except for the things which you want to leave with them on purpose as a gift. You set it all up so that you've done that in a nice way. So we're at the 30-minute mark. That is basically the process of what's happening on stage, and how it works for people in their minds. Narrowed attention, increased absorption, suggestibility, hallucinations. That's the really ultra simple way of saying it. And again, when people train with me, we train on that whole process, right from the minute people walk in and they sit down, how you can set up a pre-show thing that plays, a pre-show slideshow that starts priming the pump for hypnosis, to how you then come out and deliver your pre-talk, and you deliver a pre-talk that continues to prime the pump for hypnosis, to what to do with them in the hypnotic state to help them stay focused, to make them more open to accepting the suggestions you give, all that stuff, right? And there, like I said before, there's a certain art to it. We're going to discuss that in tomorrow's webinar, but there's also a scientific process to it, understanding how trance develops, how trance deepens, how to utilize trance, all right, and how to take good care of people when they're having that experience. So that's that. All right, we're going to open it up to questions. Let me check the Twitter feed here. What's the deal with the Russian special forces? All right, on some of my stuff that I sent out before, I had mentioned a funny story that had happened to me in the first few years of my hypnosis career. Probably about, I don't know, 4 years in. I'd been doing it for a while. I wasn't a rookie. I got hired for a corporate event. And this is a good example of why you really need to get the appropriate training, because you never know what's going to happen in a hypnosis show. The same suggestion that you've given 100 times before can play out completely differently one day in a stage show. And this is an example of that. So I used to have this bit that I did in my show where it was a 2-stage bit, really. In the first part of it, what I would do is I would anchor a response to 2 handkerchiefs. One handkerchief was, they were different colors. One handkerchief was pink, and I anchored a response to them that anytime they saw the pink handkerchief, it would just be funny. The more they laughed at it, the better it made them feel, the more they enjoyed themselves, the pink handkerchief. Then I had a green handkerchief, and I anchored a negative response to the green handkerchief. The green handkerchief looked bad, it smelled bad, it was the nastiest thing they've ever seen, it was gross. And I'd set that up within the first 10 minutes of the utilization period. It was the first thing I did. It was actually a way for me to test early hallucinations. Could they have an emotional response to the pink one? Could they hallucinate nasty smell, nasty look to the green one? And I'd play that out. And we'd have a little fun with that just on its own. It'd make people laugh, and they were cool with that. Then I'd go on and I would do the rest of the show. And I would work a good 45 minutes probably worth of stuff throughout the rest of the show. Toward the end of the show, I would then come back to it the way that comedians do what's called a comeback, where they make a joke early on in the show, and then they have another punchline that references that earlier punchline later in the show. I use the same technique. So the comeback was, I would have apples, 2 apples, and I would tell one of my subjects that I would give them the suggestion that they were the protector of all fruit, and that there were new laws about the consumption of fruit, and that the law clearly stated that at this time of day, people were not allowed to eat fruit. Fruit consumption was prohibited at this point in the day. And I'd wake up all my subjects from hypnosis, And I would have this post-hypnotic with this person, right? And so I would have the 2 apples hidden. And as I was talking conversationally, I would say something like, "Oh, I've been traveling all day. I'm really just so tired. I haven't had a chance to eat dinner. Man, I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to have this apple while I finish the show." And I'd pull out the apple, and right into the microphone, I'd take a big bite out of the apple, make it crunch right into the microphone. And the protector of the fruit would always jump right up and come over to me. Sometimes they'd yell at me. Sometimes they'd be polite. The way they internalize the suggestion is up to them. Sometimes they would be very authoritarian and yell at me. Sometimes they would be polite and they'd say, "Excuse me, sir, but you can't do that." And they would confiscate the fruit. I'd milk the situation with them a little bit. What's the big deal? This is a free country. What do you mean I can't have fruit? All this kind of stuff. Finally, I'd let them take the apple and go back to their seat. Once they got back to their seat, I'd go, "You know what? I don't care. You can have that apple because I brought 2." And I'd take the second apple out. And of course, they would immediately get up and start coming toward me again. And as they got within about 4 or 5 feet away, and I had the apple here, I would take the green handkerchief out of my pocket and hold it between them and me and the apple. And they would always have this like, ew, kind of gross. I'd have grown men shriek and run away. You'd get this really good negative response. That was the way the bit usually worked. I know this is a long story, but it's worth it. I get hired for this corporate gig. The people that hired me did not read my rider that came along with the contract and told them what I needed for the show. The rider said I needed 2 apples or 2 pieces of fruit. They didn't provide it. I really wanted to do the bit. What they did have at this corporate event was a big, beautiful dessert table. So I just adjusted the suggestion. And I told the guy he was the protector of the dessert table, that the staff had worked really hard to create all these beautiful desserts, that we were at an important company event, and that people needed to be restrained. I didn't use restrained at the time, actually. A little foreshadowing there. I said people need to be respectful of the dessert table and not consume desserts until they're told to do so. So I set all that up. Now, I always, when I did this bit, I always would then turn to the audience and I would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, please, it's very important you understand, don't get involved at this point in the show. Don't try to get involved with what I just set up, because this person's going to take their job really seriously. They're going to want to do the job to the best of their ability, and I'd hate for anything to happen. Just let me handle it." Well, on this day, one individual who was working for the company completely ignored that. He thought he was going to be the like class clown, star of the show type of guy. And he worked his way around the room and got over toward aligned with the dessert table. And I had set up like 3 other suggestions. It was a point in the show where I was working multiple suggestions at once. So as I'm working the earlier suggestions and not getting ready, I see this guy and I just can tell by the look on his face, he's going to go for the dessert table. So I start working my way over to that side as well. And I'm working my other things and working my other things. And finally, he gets to where I can tell he's lined up and I can't go any further really. And so I directly confront him and I say, "Dude, what did I say to you?" And he knows that's it. He's got to make his move now, right? So he makes a break. He's just ignoring me and he goes right for the table. Well, my guy, he's in. The hypnosis is working. My guy comes up out of his chair, sprints for the table. They get there at the same time. Class clown picks up a handful of chocolate cake. My guy, in perfect form, tackles him to the ground, swings his legs up around the other man's torso, and does an MMA move called an arm bar, where he's got one leg across the guy's throat, one leg across the guy's chest, and he's extending the arm like a lever in between his own 2 legs to pull it back. Now, I saw it all happen coming. So before it could ever get to the point where it was dangerous, I was there. Right as he gets the guy on the floor, basically, and he's starting to pull the arm back, I put my hand on him and I say, "Stop." And of course, he listens to me because we're in this cooperative relationship. And all I had to do was say to him, I said, look, you've stopped him. He does not have any dessert. You've done your job perfectly. Thank you. You can stand up now. And so he lets the guy go. He stands up. The other guy stands up looking very sheepish because now he's realized if I hadn't intervened, he probably would have had his arm broken by the other guy. And I go, off you go, and I send him off. Now, the unfortunate thing here is because the guy got involved in the show and grabbed the cake, there's chocolate cake smeared in the carpet. There's rich, fatty, greasy chocolate frosting all smeared in my guy's shirt, his nice dress shirt. It was kind of a mess. I was pretty disappointed in the other guy for so blatantly ignoring what I asked of him. But I also was amazed at how expertly my guy applied this armbar move. I sent him back to his seat. I finished the rest of the show. And at the end of the show, I go up to my guy and I say, hey, now I never met this guy before the show, keep in mind. I just got hired for this event. I walk up to him and I say, hey, I'm really sorry that that other guy got involved and got frosting on you and all that stuff. And he says to me, oh, it's okay, no big deal, thick Russian accent. And I say to him, listen, I just have to ask, why is it that you were so good at putting that arm bar on the guy? What's that all about? And he shrugs like it's no big deal and he goes, well, in Russia, for 5 years, I was special forces and we train on these things. So without knowing it, I had hypnotized a former Russian special forces operative to be my protector of the dessert table. It was a pure coincidence. There's no way I ever could have known. But that's a good example of how when you're doing this work and you're doing this business, you never know what's going to come. And you really have to be prepared all the time to manage any kind of situation. Now, what he experienced because of the alignment with his past service experience was he really took on that persona. He had a hallucination that he was a different person. He dissociated, right? This is the psychological idea of dissociation. He dissociated from his normal identity and he became this other person, the protector of the dessert table. This is what happens when people get deep, deep into hypnosis. And military personnel, because of their training, because they're trained so much to unquestioningly follow orders, military personnel are usually some of the best hypnotic subjects because they've spent thousands and thousands of hours training on how to follow orders without questioning them critically. That's their job, is to follow them as quickly and efficiently as possible for their own safety and the safety of others. So this guy was a perfect candidate for this kind of a situation. And luckily, I had the proper training and the experience to diffuse that situation before it came rough. And the crowd was uproariously laughing the whole time, at what they saw. They weren't thinking like a hypnotist like I was. And they thought it was hilarious. And because I was able to handle it well, it ended up being a funny thing and not a problem. So I hope that story kind of shows you the kinds of things you can deal with. Let me check my Twitter feed again here. Okay, why doesn't everyone have the ability to have hallucinations? Okay, so hallucinations are, again, they're a complex thing to do. Technically, we all can hallucinate, right? But in order to hallucinate, what you really have to do, this comes back again to the concept of dissociation. People fall along a spectrum of hypnotizability. Not everyone has the same level of hypnotizability. It's just like IQ. In fact, David Spiegel's work at Stanford suggests that just like IQ, you can take an IQ test when you're 10 years old, and you take another IQ test when you're 70, and your IQ, if it's a proper test, will be within 2 points of the 10-year-old IQ rating. Our IQ, our intelligence quotient, how much knowledge we accumulate over our life grows and grows and grows. but our IQ, our intelligence quotient, it stays the same pretty much for our entire lifespan. Dr. Spiegel's work suggests the same thing about hypnotizability, that you have an innate, genetically predispositioned ability to be hypnotized. Dr. Roz and some other associates did a study in the 2005 range, I think, which suggests that this is connected to dopamine receptors and some other brain function areas. But that literally, what their work suggests is that how hypnotizable you are is connected to having certain types of dopamine receptors. We have multiple types of dopamine receptors. And genetically, just like some of us are born with blue eyes and some of us are born with brown eyes, some of us are born with more of certain types of dopamine receptors than other people. And that there are certain types that make us more predisposed to being good hypnotic subjects. So when you look at these things, that hypnotizability over the course of your lifespan is like IQ in that it doesn't really change much. As you discover your hypnotizability and you practice it, you'll get better and better at it to the extent which you are ultimately capable of. And that then there seems to be a sort of ceiling, and you won't really go much past that ceiling. So if that is the case, then that will be the case for all related hypnotic experiences. People who are really good at going deeply into hypnosis are going to be the ones who are able to have more complex hallucinations. People who are better at hypnosis are going to be able to have these deeper dissociations. Dissociation is ability to really step outside of yourself and have a different experience from the one you most commonly think of within your own identity. To literally think you're a different person, you know, on the like bad mental health experience end of things. You may have heard stories before of people who dissociate and they think that they're Jesus Christ. They literally have a mental breakdown and they think they're Jesus. It's a very common dissociation for people who have mental health breakdowns to have. Well, that's sort of like the sad or bad version of dissociation. Dissociation occurs on a spectrum. When you daydream and you really stop noticing your conscious daytime experience and you get more and more into your daydream, you're really dissociating to some extent from your current lived experience, and you're dissociating into the daydream state. We do this on all these different levels when we hypnotize people, right? And so they're connected, though, to how hypnotizable you are. You can't exceed with your hallucination experience, with your dissociation experience. You can't exceed your own level of hypnotizability. It has to work with it. So because people have these different levels genetically, that's what it seems like from the research that I'm read. More research needs to be done on that. A lot of hypnotists still are sort of wanting to reject that, and they want to believe that ultimately we can make everybody a great hypnotic subject. I tend to say, until you show me the research that says that, I'm going to stick with the research so far, because I want to work with evidence-based claims about hypnosis. And so far, that seems to suggest that hypnotizability is like IQ, that it falls along a sort of spectrum, and that your hypnotizability doesn't change much over the course of your life. You still need to get the practice, though. So initially, there can feel like a really big change from when you first get started doing hypnosis to where you end up being. There's a learning curve there, an experiential curve, and it can feel like a pretty big difference. So I hope that answered your question. Let's see. Any more questions? Where are we on the... No comments on the host page. You guys, leave me some comments on the host page. I'll follow up with you. I'll keep checking out the host page. And if you have any more questions, I'll follow them up there. Of course, I'll answer them on Twitter as well. If you keep questioning, dropping comments on Twitter, I'll be happy to interact with you there as well. But I guess I'm going to call it a day for this. So that's the science of hypnosis from a stage perspective, okay? If you want to train in stage hypnotism, Stay with us. We got 2 more webinars to go. Tomorrow is the art of stage hypnotism, and on Thursday, the heart of stage hypnotism. And then after that, I'll let you know more about my stage hypnosis online training program, which is coming out this week at the end of the week, and we can talk more about that. But I hope you're getting some value from this, and it's giving you a sense of how stage hypnotism works and how it might work for you, and does that fire up your curiosity even more. But understanding this stuff is really key. There's too much training going on where people are just learning what their teachers learned before them. It drives me crazy when people pretty much, they do what they do because that's how they were taught to do it. We need to stop that in our professional community. We need to have more and more people who really understand hypnotism and who represent our profession as competent, thorough professionals. When you create something on stage, it should not just be because you saw someone else do it or because your instructor taught you to do it that way. It should be because you understand hypnotism and that you have a reason for doing what you're doing. So, I'm just trying to scratch the surface with these webinars and give you a sense of what that stuff is so that maybe you'll understand. Get good training. If it's not with me, fine, but get good training with someone who's not just going to read to you out of a book or just teach you what their trainer taught them. Get someone who's going to mentor you and teach you the science behind hypnotism so that you understand it well, so that you can protect your people and take good care of them on stage, so that you can help them have an exceptional experience and really open their minds to not only having a hypnotic experience as a form of entertainment, but then maybe afterward using it to make their life better, telling their friends and family about it so maybe they'll use it to make their lives better. I think that's really important. So, that's it. I'll get off my soapbox. But thanks for joining me today. I'm Paul Ramsey, and we'll see you again real soon. Thank you so much. I appreciate you spending time with me. Take care.